All right, good morning. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you notice, I've already posted a link to my comparison of the 10 words in English. So I pasted that link and I want you to have this pulled up either on your screen if you don't have it printed out. Today's class is going to be a bit technical. We're going to be using this chart which compares the 10 words in Exodus and Deuteronomy side by side. We're going to be using this chart a good bit today. So it's going to be a better class. You're going to be able to understand more of what I'm telling you if you're looking at this chart. So if you don't have it printed out, please notice in the comments. I'm going to paste it again so that you've got it. Look at me multitasking here. I want everybody to take notice. See there? So you'll see under United Israel World Union, there is a link directly to this chart. So get the chart ready. We are presently in our ongoing series on the 10-word covenant. We are this week in class number 15. Class number 15. We're talking about the covenant at Horeb, the covenant at Sinai, the covenant that was spoken from the midst of the fire on the day of assembly. These words that came forth on that day of assembly were later engraved upon stone tablets, 2 stone tablets with the finger of God. And these 10 words make up what is called in the Torah the testimony, the adut of the living God, the God Jehovah. In Deuteronomy 33, we get this interesting designation for these stone tablets. It's called the Eshdat, the fire law. So we're talking about the covenant, the words of the living God, the words of Jehovah that came forth on that special day at Mount Horeb. Now today, we've been at this 15 weeks. Today, I intend to finish up, don't get nervous, but I'm going to finish up the 10 words. Now, I'm not saying that I'm finished with the series, but I'm actually intending today to complete our journey through a close examination of the words of the covenant. I have other ideas beginning next week, so I'm still praying about that. I'm still studying. I don't know yet, but I do have every intention today of completing the 10-word covenant. Now, when I say that I've got to finish today, that means we've done 8 words of the 10. That means that today in my time with you, I'm going to go through 2. I'm going to go through words 9 and 10 in the 10-word covenant. As some of you know that I have a hard enough time getting through 1 word in an hour and 15 minutes, but I really think that I can do this. So that's the goal today. So you can call this in a way a double header, or hopefully a double blessing. Now the question becomes, why would I go through 2 in one day? And why did it work out that way? Well, the reasons are as follows. My method of counting, as I've stressed in previous classes, is to go by the white spaces found within the Hebrew text. So if you look at in my example, in my comparison sheet, or if you have a Hebrew Bible, or a Bible which indicates the white spaces, such as the Koran Jerusalem Tanakh, then you'll be able to look at, beginning in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, as you work through the 10-word covenant, you'll see the white spaces or the breaks in the text. These don't always line up, as you've become aware through listening to some of my classes. These don't always line up with chapter and verse breaks in the English Bible. But if you work through the 10 words in Exodus and Deuteronomy, you'll see that the words, the spacing, the breaks line up almost exactly until you get to today's class. Now there's one exception. If you'll go back with me, if you're looking at my chart, if you look at Exodus chapter 20 and verse 7, and look directly across at Deuteronomy 5 verse 11, you'll see that there is a different Hebrew letter for the break indicated in the text. So for instance, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, this is the word concerning lifting God's name for falsehood. There is the Hebrew letter pei, and that indicates petucha. It's a major break. And then if you look at Deuteronomy 5:11, it's a setuma. It's a samik. And that indicates that it is a small break. All right, more of sort of like our paragraph, if you will. But other than that, I mean, in other words, whether it's a major break or a minor break, the breaks line up and give us a count from 1 to 10. But that's only because Deuteronomy, in the material I'm going to cover today, gives us 2 breaks and not 1. Now, all of this is going to make sense. So what I will cover today, the material that I'm going to cover today, Exodus presents the material as a single word. But if I'm right, and I believe I am, by counting these words according to the white spaces, then Exodus only has 9. Now, what this caused over the long run is people who favored the Exodus version, because Exodus and Deuteronomy give different versions. The people who favored Exodus's version had to find a way to come up with 10. So I believe that that's what caused the word number 1 to be broken into 2 as opposed to 1, as I believe it should be. Now, Deuteronomy presents the material that I'll cover today as 2 words. Now, other people have noticed this. I'm not the first to notice this, but other people have noticed that in Deuteronomy you have 2 words, and there are a couple of reasons for that we'll get into today. Again, this is going to be very detailed, very deep, but it's going to be informative, and I'm going to try to do my best to make sure that I communicate it in a good way. I believe that the people who log in every week are very good Bible students and quite capable of understanding if the teacher is able to communicate adequately and properly that which I intend to cover. So, here we go. There are more differences between Exodus and Deuteronomy's version of the word I want to cover today than just simply a breaking between 1 and 2. There are differences in vocabulary. Different Hebrew words are going to appear in this material that I cover today. There is a different arrangement of words and phrases. This is, if you look at this carefully, I'm talking about take a very close look, you'll notice quite a bit of difference between the version of Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. So are you ready to dig in? I hope you are. I hope by now that you have all pulled up this particular comparison chart because, as I said, this class today is going to be detailed and you're going to need to see with your eyes that which I am saying in order to make it really clear. I want to begin by stressing an important point about this material that I'm covering today. A key word, a word that we should be focused on, actually beginning last week, but particularly today, is the Hebrew word neighbor. All right, we're going to talk about neighbor. This is a key and important point in everything that we're going to talk about today. Now, I talked a little bit about neighbor last week because the word that we covered last week was you're not to respond against your neighbor as a lying witness or as a false witness. Now, beginning with last week's class, the focus begins to zoom in on the word neighbor. And you'll recall that last week I talked about this. How broadly do we define neighbor, or narrowly, as the case might be? Do we look at neighbor as something in a very narrow sense or a very broad sense? Because the Bible uses the word in both contexts. Now, I'm going to give you this as we go into today's material. Be safe today. Listen and trust me on this. Go wide. Go wide on your definition of neighbor, forever and always. I would hate to think of something that God charged me in a very narrow sense, and I thereby violated because I was too narrow in my thinking. Does that make sense? So when we talk about neighbor, biblically, particularly within the 10-word covenant, I'm going to urge you to think in a broad way. Think about neighbor in a very broad sense. Our word today has something to do with desiring and craving. Desiring and craving, comma, what belongs to our neighbor. Okay? So follow me on this. We're going to be talking about desires, impulses, cravings, urgings, but we're going to be dealing with a very particular aspect of that, and that is if we're desiring or craving that which is not ours. Okay? So I want to cover this fully today. I want you to clearly understand. To have a desire, to have a craving is not in and of itself bad, evil, sin. Right? You can look at something and really, really want it. A lot of people go overboard with this. They begin to think, I'm not supposed to even, they get so tight on it that they miss the point. This is very specific. We're talking about desiring and craving that which is not yours. That which is not yours. Often, when people begin to think about and talk about the material that I'm going to cover today, they use the word covet. You've heard the word covet. Covet has almost become, over time, a parochial word. It's sort of on that bookshelf of religious vocabulary. Like atonement, for instance. There's no word in Hebrew for atonement. And you might say, well, sure there is. What about the Day of Atonement? Literally, the Hebrew just says covering. There's no religious parochial word, atonement. It's really, that comes late in the development, the evolution of language. In Hebrew, it's cover. So when people talk about covet, they're defining and imposing on the ancient Hebrew perhaps more than, or using language which was not available in the Hebrew vocabulary. In fact, I was reading the Anchor Bible Dictionary commentary on this particular material, and it says very plainly, there is no word in Hebrew for covet. It means desire. The word that we're going to talk about today is dealing with desire. Because first of all, very few people use the word covet in English outside of a religious context. I mean, they really don't. I mean, I remember as I grew up in church, somebody might say this. They would, because they want to sound religious or whatever, or maybe not that they're trying to do it and they don't really mean it. But someone might say, I'm going to be making a journey this week. I covet your prayers. You ever hear somebody say something like that? It means I desire your prayers. Just speak English, modern English. Listen, I desire your prayers. I'm going on this trip. But we don't use covet. So I'm getting to the point that this particular, like everything else we've studied, we want to determine what is it that the Hebrew, particularly the Hebrew 10-word covenant, what is it that it is requiring and demanding of us? What does the Bible mean when it says, you shall not desire your neighbor's, you fill in the blank, right? What does that mean? So using the chart, and again, I want everybody using the chart. This is going to be a lot easier to follow. I want to focus on that which this word, this material, has in common between the Exodus version and the Deuteronomy version. Now, a lot of people get nervous when I'm doing what we call critical biblical study. This is not the same as skeptical biblical study. You understand the difference? Critically, I'm looking with a careful eye at the text in front of me. I'm doing what we call a horizontal study. Most people study the Bible vertically. They read the book of Genesis from beginning to end. They read the book of Exodus from beginning to end, and then Leviticus, and then Numbers, and then Deuteronomy. What I want to do, that's called vertical reading. You continually read through the text without break. What I'm trying to do when I study is look horizontally. If I have an account in Exodus, for instance, and I have the same story told in Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, I want to look at them side by side, and I want to observe the differences. Because it's in the differences, it's in the details quite often that we truly begin to grasp the meaning and the essence that is meant to be conveyed. So I want to begin today by looking at this material in Exodus and Deuteronomy, but I want your eye to only notice black. Ignore the red. The red in both cases, anytime you see red in my comparison chart, it indicates a variation. Now, if you don't have my chart and you have no way to get it, you need to have a way to flip between Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17 and Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 21. That's what I'm dealing with. All right, only the black. Are we ready? So if we read only the black, here's what you'll see. You shall not desire your neighbor's blank. You shall not blank your neighbor's blank, and his servant, and his handmaid, and his ox, and his donkey, and all that is for your neighbor. You see that? If I pull out the red, those places where the two are different, what I'm doing, I pull a red out of the way, I'm only looking at that which is identical between Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, Deuteronomy 5:21. Now this is like a game of Jeopardy. Isn't it Jeopardy? What's the game where you play and you go, can I buy a vowel? That may not be the right game. Anyway, the idea is that we're trying to fill in the blanks because what I just read is identical between the two, but by inserting what is read between them, I come up with some distinctions. Now, let's go deeper. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, Deuteronomy has a tendency to use conjunctions. So you'll see the word and over and over. Look at my chart. If you begin in verse 17, you shall not murder, and you shall not adulterate, and you shall not steal, and you shall not answer against your neighbor as a false witness. Now look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. You shall not murder, you shall not adulterate, you shall not steal, you shall not... You see that? Deuteronomy always uses a conjunction, and Exodus never uses it. Interesting. Now, I also want you to pay attention that when you look at the conjunction on the Deuteronomy side, what you are getting is a flag, if you will, that here's a new word. You have the conjunction on the beginning and the white space on the end. Now that works its way all the way down so that what we get in Deuteronomy, the way it reads, it's like a connected series of prohibitions. It's like a continuous, because now remember, in this portion of the 10-word covenant, we're dealing with human-to-human interaction. It's called the second pentad by some. The last 5, as some people number them, deal with mankind's behavior towards other mankind. So this is a connected series. It's like, don't do this, and don't do that, and don't do that, and don't do that. All of these are connected. And we get a series of these, first dealing with forbidden actions. Now follow me on this. Actions like don't kill, or murder if you prefer. Don't murder, right? And then if you look down, and don't adulterate. These are physical crimes. It's nothing, we're not talking about something other than physical crimes. And then steal, taking something that belongs to another. These are forbidden actions. And then we get to one, and you shall not answer against your neighbor as a false or a lying witness. Now we're dealing with speech, which is forbidden. So you have actions, physical crimes, and you have words. Some speech is forbidden. Now this works on the human side of the 10-word covenant. It also works on the divine. Like there is a portion of speech which is forbidden on the divine human interaction side of things in the 10-word covenant. You're not to lift the name Jehovah for falsehood. In other words, you're not to make an oath, a false oath, and bring Jehovah's name into that oath. So we have actions on both the human to human and human to divine that are forbidden, and we have words, and we have words that are forbidden as well. Now what you're going to learn today is that we're going to go even further. There's some actions you can't do, some words you can't say, and get ready, because what is coming at you today, I believe, is the hardest yet. Perhaps more demanding than anything that is placed upon humanity. It's one thing to control your actions. It's another thing to control your words. A lot of times people say things that they would never do. The 10-word covenant asks us to not only put boundaries, or it puts boundaries on our actions and our words, but as you will see today, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. Now, look at Deuteronomy 5:21 on your comparison chart. Now, we just talked about the conjunction. Notice the way this begins. And you shall not desire your neighbor's woman, and you shall not crave your neighbor's house, field, servant, handmaid, so forth. Notice verse 21 begins, and you shall not desire. And then under it, it says, and you shall not crave. Now, I want you to take notice of a couple of things. What you see before your eyes in Deuteronomy 5:21 is the two words that form the final part of the 10-word covenant. Now, if you were to look at Exodus, which we'll do shortly, you're only going to see one. you're only going to see one. But Deuteronomy is careful to distinguish two separate words. Two separate words, 9 and 10. And these are indicated in a couple of ways. One, as I showed you above, Deuteronomy chapter 5 is very careful. Every time it begins towards this latter part, dealing human to human, they're all connected with the conjunction and. So a new word begins, there's a conjunction at the front. Here we have it. And you shall not desire your neighbor's woman. And you shall not crave your neighbor's, etc. Now there's another thing that stands out in the text. Notice in Deuteronomy 5:21, there's an indicated white space. You see that? After it says, and you shall not desire your neighbor's woman, there's a white space. Now if you look over at Exodus 17, there's not one. Follow me? All right, so now let's go further. Look at Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17. It begins, you shall not desire your neighbor's house. Now look over at Deuteronomy 5:21. And you shall not desire your neighbor's woman. They begin with differences. Both Exodus and Deuteronomy have a phrase about your neighbor's house. I mean, remember when I read through only the black and I brought up, there is a lot of commonality between these two. But it's the order of the words, it's the vocabulary employed, and it's the different words that are used which create sort of a jumbled, a little bit of confusion. So what we have to do is we have to pull out the differences, we have to carefully look at them, and we have to focus on the common and then rework the text from the ground up, if you will. So I want you to understand that both Exodus and Deuteronomy deal with neighbor's house. But Exodus puts it first, makes it the lead-off comment. You shall not desire your neighbor's house. Deuteronomy separates one thing out above everything else and places it first and calls it, you shall not desire your neighbor's woman. When Deuteronomy talks about your neighbor's house, it puts it in another word. It separates out your neighbor's woman all by itself, makes it the head, the lead point, and, get this, Deuteronomy uses a different word. So when Deuteronomy talks about your neighbor's house, notice in 5:21, Deuteronomy 5:21, and you shall not crave, and then it gives a list of forbidden cravings. Your neighbor's house, his field, his servant, his handmaid, his ox, his donkey, and all that is for your neighbor. You realize that Deuteronomy even adds something that you're not supposed to crave that belongs to your neighbor that Exodus doesn't even mention? That's field. You see that? See how that's read? His field. So Deuteronomy, I want to make this point, and some of you might be thinking, oh, it's a mountain out of a molehill. You're straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. I don't believe I am. I believe that it's very important. There is something that you are not supposed to desire, according to Deuteronomy, and that is your neighbor's woman. That's what you are not to. Now we're going to define desire a little more closely shortly. There are several things that you're not supposed to crave, according to Deuteronomy. crave. We're going to define that too. You're not supposed to crave your neighbor's house, his field, his servant, his handmaid, his ox, his donkey, and all that is for your neighbor. That's a separate word. That's word number 10. Exodus doesn't even mention field, and it puts everything together, uses only one Hebrew word, and says you are not to desire any of this. It's all one word. All right. Now, if I haven't lost you, look back at Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17. Exodus 20 and verse 17. Now you see where it says, you shall not desire your neighbor's woman in Exodus 20? It's not the first sentence, it's the second sentence in Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. You shall not desire your neighbor's woman. That is exactly what is written at the beginning of Deuteronomy 5:21, representing word number 9. You follow? You shall not desire your neighbor's woman. So even though I've covered a lot of differences between the two, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, now I want to start building back up on the consistency. So notice both Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5 have the phrase, you shall not desire your neighbor's woman. Same Hebrew. Now we're at word 9 for my study. Deuteronomy singles out this desiring of a neighbor's woman. And so now that we're on the same page, we can really begin to look at word number 9. And word number 9 is, you shall not desire your neighbor's woman. Now, by the way, I will, by next week, probably today or tomorrow, publish a final version of my 10-word comparison chart, but I will have them listed 1 through 10 so that you will have before you an accurate, based on my understanding, an accurate list of God's 10-word covenant. So that's coming at you. Just be prepared. So word number 9. That was a long introduction, right? Word number 9 begins like this. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa. Now, lo, remember this. You're learning Hebrew. I know you are. Lo is the negative particle. So lo means no or not. So the question becomes, what is tachmod? Now, I'm translating it as desire. The root word chamed is desire. So really when you see the tav on the front, lo tachmod, what you're saying is, no, you shall desire. Or as if I were to smooth it out a little bit, I could say, you shall not desire. You know, getting the grammatical syntax into English a little bit better. But I want to move us off lo tachmod for a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about eshet re'echa, the woman of your neighbor. This particular phrase, eshet re'echa, occurs 12 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, the woman of your neighbor. Now, most often, let me just cover a couple of them just so you kind of get the point. The occurrences that we're familiar with are here in the 10 words in Exodus 20, verse 17, Deuteronomy 5:21. Eshet re'echa. You're not to commit adultery with them, and you're not even to desire. So if you look with me, let's go to Leviticus chapter 20. I want to show you something here. Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10. And it says in Leviticus 20 and verse 10, "And the man that commits adultery with another man's wife," literally woman, "that commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death." Now I want you to look at that closely. Some translations only have it once. But in this particular passage, I saw this last night. I didn't see it in the English translation I was looking at. But when I go back as I prepare my class, I always look at the Hebrew and read it closely. And I noticed in Hebrew, it has it twice. The man that commits adultery with another man's woman, that commits adultery with another man's woman, it's almost like it's underlining it. Now, critical scholarship would just say, oh, that's called haplography, or it's not haplography where you leave something out, but it's where a scribe is writing, he looks down at the text before him, he forgets where he is and repeats the same phrase. That's one academic answer for it. But it's almost as if I believe that what this is it's underscoring it. A man that commits adultery with the woman of his neighbor, that commits adultery with the woman of his neighbor, like underlining it. Now we know that this is a crime. We know that this is a sin. Now, I'm just going to mention a couple of these others because I have a lot of material to cover. Deuteronomy Chapter 22 and verse 24 mentions that when one has sex with the woman of his neighbor, he humiliates her, or humbles. Humble's not the right word. Humiliate is really the better word there. But that's in Deuteronomy 22:24. In Jeremiah chapter 5 verse 8 and 29 verse 23. I'm not going to go there. I just want you to get that. The prophets, by the way, are very, very outspoken against crimes of sexual nature. For instance, this one, which plagues the world today, just like it did in antiquity. But notice, Jeremiah describes men who are neighing, calling out, making noises after their neighbors' wives. Like they're just despicable. These are like debased humans. They're like, I'm not saying like a wolf call. I'm talking about something very, very vile. They're calling out to these women. Jeremiah's on them about this. Ezekiel talks about this, the intercourse with the wife of your neighbor as being not only defiling, but just really debased. So it's over and over. Ezekiel 18 in several places. Ezekiel 22, Ezekiel 33. The prophets are saying that the crimes a man commits against the woman of his neighbor are bad. They're prevalent in the society. Now, what is different about today, and I'm just going to touch this and move on, is that now this is nothing. I mean, people don't even really talk about adultery. So what? This is the way people think. This isn't me. Some people say, the guy left his other woman and took somebody else's woman. And people talk about that in conversation like it's because it's so common. And yet it's destroying families. All right, I already had that class. We know that adultery is wrong. We know that. Biblical people, I'm saying. The rest of the world may not think it's wrong. Biblical people know that it's a crime. You've heard them of old say, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you, don't even think about it. Now, you know that I'm quoting Jesus of Nazareth. And by the way, from time to time, if I mention Jesus of Nazareth, there are people within the Hebrew faith community, most of which were former Christians, get their feathers in a ruffle because they now believe that nothing from that world is even worth considering. Well, I don't agree with that. I grew up, as most of you know, in church, and I am fascinated with the historical Jesus. What can we discern from the authentic, if you will? Now, some people leave the Christianity and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And even though I don't teach from the New Testament, let me be very clear. My teacher, Dr. James Tabor, is a brilliant New Testament scholar. And he's taught me and countless others, look, there is something about this historical person that changed the world. And let me tell you something about what he said about the subject I'm talking about today. It is absolutely brilliant. It is the single most powerful thing that any human ever said about this, and most people don't even recognize it, and they sure don't give him credit for it. Everybody knows you shall not commit adultery, but nobody takes it this far. People laugh and scoff at this. I've heard people say, look, the New Testament commands things that the glorious Hebrew Bible would never command because God knows that we can't control our thinking. Does He? Listen to me, people. Nothing about what I just said about God not thinking you should control your thinking, that's not true. God does expect you to control your inner person, your thoughts, your heart. Yeshua said if you desire the woman of another man, you have already committed adultery with her in your heart. And let me tell you something. He's right. He's right. And he didn't even leave the 10-word covenant. So if it makes somebody upset that I mention Jesus of Nazareth in a Hebrew Bible class, then that's your problem and not mine. Here we go. Please listen and learn. Go with me to Genesis chapter 6. Go to Genesis chapter 6. I'm about to disprove this idea that one is not expected to control their thinking. Here we go. Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 5. Genesis 6, 5. And Jehovah saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that all the impulse of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Jehovah repented that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And Jehovah said, I will destroy man whom I've created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping things and bird of the air, for I repent that I have made them. Now, what has put Jehovah in the place where he sees humanity as irredeemable on the whole is that every formation of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the day. And you say, yeah, but they were doing bad stuff too. They were doing bad actions too, Ross. It wasn't just the... Listen, I'm just talking Bible here. I'm not giving you an interpretation. I'm saying that Jehovah saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and he defines it as every formation of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the day. So you mean to tell me that someone can laugh and scoff that God doesn't expect us to control our thinking? Go with me to Genesis chapter 8, please. Chapter 8 and verse 21. And Jehovah smelled the sweet savor, and Jehovah said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the impulse of man's heart is evil from his youth. God recognizes that there's a heart problem here. Every formation of his heart, it's evil. Look, one more text. Go with me, Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah 17 and verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and grievously weak. Who can know it? I, Jehovah, search the heart. I try the inward parts, even to give man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. Listen, the heart in Hebrew it says is most crooked, or crooked, michol, from all. Like if you're looking at things, you go, what's the most crooked thing out there? Jehovah says the heart. The inner, see what the Torah is trying to do is get to your inside. Look, you can go through life and say, man, I would like to take that guy's woman. And as long as you don't, there are a lot of people who think, well, I didn't. Boy, I thought about it, but I didn't. But God doesn't control my thought. You keep thinking that way, and you're going to continually live your life in sin. If that's all it is, if you want to kill and steal and you just don't because you say, well, I can't because there's a rule against it, that's not holiness. That's not righteousness, and that is not what God intends humans to be in the end. He wants us to get His instructions on the inside. God's looking at the inner person. He doesn't look on the outside. Remember the story of David? It says God doesn't see people like we see people. We look at people in the news or whatever and we say, look, that guy, he's got it all together. He's got his family. We don't know that person. God does. Look, does this word about desiring the woman of a neighbor, I'm asking you, do you think this gets at the heart level? Can it be that God would expect, that He would demand, that He would command, that He would require of mankind to control your very inner impulses? Is that doable? How many times have you heard, well, boys will be boys? You ever hear somebody say, man, you know, I can dream, a man can dream, as long as I don't follow through with it. You picture, look, that's embarrassing to think that men have to be that way. Lo takmod. Lo takmod means you shall not desire. Now, let me ask you, is desire a physical action? I mean, it can have physical, like you could sit there with your tongue hanging out, panting. I mean, that's a physical, but I'm talking about if you desire something, like really desire, is that talking about a physical action or an inner impulse? It's the latter. It's a mental activity. It's an inside. We're talking about, like the Bible puts it, as the formation of the thoughts of the heart. The formation of the thoughts of the heart. Now this phrase, lo takmod, you shall not desire, occurs 5 times in Scripture. 5 times. two times in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17, where it deals with the house and wife, or the house and the woman of a neighbor. You're not to desire the house and the woman of your neighbor. Deuteronomy 5:21 just has it once, that the only thing you're not supposed to desire is the woman of your neighbor. Exodus 34 and 24, let me just show you a couple of these I have in my notes. Go to Exodus 34, 24, just so you get an idea. What does it mean, lo tachmod? Exodus 34, 24. Man, this is a beautiful Bible. Have you seen this Bible? Don't even think about it. I know what you're thinking. Okay. Exodus 34, 24 says, for I will cast the nations before thee and enlarge thy borders, neither shall any man desire thy land when you shall go up to appear before Jehovah your God 3 times in a year. This phrase, that lo tachmod, it means that when you leave your place to go to Jerusalem to keep the feast, someone is not going to be desirous of your land. They're not going to have that impulse to take your land. God is providing a protective boundary and promising that won't even creep into their mind. Your enemies even, when you go to appear before Jehovah, these nations, these surrounding nations, they're not going to get it. They're not going to have that impulse. Now that's incredible. Think about it. Now look with me at Deuteronomy 7, Deuteronomy 7:25. Now this one's going to set us up to think about a story that we're all familiar with. Deuteronomy 7:25 says, the carvings of their gods shall you burn with fire. You shall not desire the silver or gold that is on them, or take it to you, lest you be snared with it, for it's an abomination to Jehovah your God. So one thing, lo tachmod, you're not supposed to desire the silver and the gold of these idols, these carvings of their gods. Now you remember the story of Achan, as we say Achan. Achan, go to Joshua, Joshua chapter 7. I just want to read one verse. Joshua 7:21. Joshua 7:21. And it says, when I saw among the spoil a goodly mantle of shinar and 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them and took them, and behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and silver under it. All right, so you remember this story. In fact, when we talk about Achan, we talk about the sin in the camp. You know, that was a big thing back in the day. People would talk about, man, something bad's going on with him. He must have sin in the camp. He's hidden. He took something, but I want you to focus on the beginning of that sin. The beginning of that sin was admitted by him. He says, look, I saw this beautiful thing from Shinar, and then there's gold and the silver, and I coveted them. I desired them. Like he's looking around, he's thinking, no one's going to know. Now, you might be thinking, and a lot of people think this, yeah, but see, his actual crime is in the taking. But let me tell you, lo tachmod doesn't necessarily indicate that theft, actual taking, will be done. It's just like with the case of adultery. Like you go, well, I thought about it. I really got close. I toyed with it. I teased, but I didn't follow through. Therefore, I'm right. I'm okay. That's not true. That is not biblical. Chamed means desire, take pleasure in, delight. It's not bad in and of itself. This is key. You know, the land of Israel is referred to as the desired land, the pleasant land, where it uses the root chamed. This is not bad in and of itself. You can desire something and not have infringed upon someone else's property or someone else's thing. By the way, Ezekiel's wife, I love this phrase, is called by Jehovah the delight of your eyes. He tells Ezekiel some bad news. His woman is going to die. And it's in, I think it's Ezekiel 24:16. I don't have that in my notes. But in Ezekiel, he's told, and she's called the delight of your eyes. And in Hebrew, it's mahmad. Mahmad. It means the desire. You ought to think of your woman, or if you're a woman and you have a man, you ought to think of your significant other as your desire. Right? Now, look, we're talking about the fact that chamed does not have to be bad in and of itself. Go with me to Psalm 19. Psalm 19, please. Psalm 19 and verse 9. The statutes of Jehovah are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Jehovah is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of Jehovah is clean, enduring forever. The judgment of Jehovah are true and are righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey in the honeycomb. So it's talking about a desire, biblically, something that it's an inner impulse. This is what it's talking about, and this is kosher. This is good. This is okay. You can desire. You can. Talmud. Go. You can desire. But you're not to desire forbidden things. But there are some things that are desirous. Your wife should be desirous. The land, the promised land should be desirous. The words of the living God should be desirous. But so to desire is not sin. But there's a very close line. I want you to go with me to Genesis chapter 2, please. Genesis chapter 2. Got to go all the way back to the beginning for this. Genesis 2 and verse 8. Genesis 2:8. Genesis 2:8. Jehovah Elohim, let me check the Hebrew. Yeah, and Jehovah Elohim planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he rested the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground Jehovah Elohim made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Verse 9 again. And out of the ground Jehovah Elohim made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. Pleasant to the sight is nechmad lamare. Pleasant, desirous to the sight. Like imagine you're in this garden, or any garden, but particularly this garden, but you can't imagine that. So think about being in a gorgeous orchard. And all around you are these gorgeous fruits. They're desirous to sight, and he made all of them desirous to sight and good for food. Every tree but God sets boundaries for humankind, for mankind's behavior. So I want to establish, first of all, that things can be desirous to the sight, but forbidden. Now look with me to verse 16. Chapter 2, Genesis, verse 16. And Jehovah Elohim commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. All right? So we have a rule, we have a command, we have a statute, we have they're in the midst of all these foods that are desirous to eat. It's not like one of them that was forbidden was ugly. You know, it wasn't like someone would look at it and say, oh, there's a command. I'm not going to do that anyway. Look at the thing. It's got these knots and stickers on it. I'm not going to eat that. No, it's not. He says they're beautiful to behold, but he said, oh, by the way, but this one, lo takmod. Look down at chapter 3, verse 6. Chapter 3, verse 6. And when the woman, you know the story. Snake's in the picture. The Nakah, she's already asked her, has God said, you shall not eat, and so forth. So here we go. Chapter 3, verse 6 of Genesis. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat, and so forth and so on. Listen to me. Note, when she saw, notice the first thing she says she saw. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, guess what? It's not good for food. It was the one tree that was lo tov, lochel, to eat. It's the one tree not good for food, but she sees it as good for food, as a delight to the eyes, and a desired to make one wise. Now, where it says desired to make one wise, that's the word in our command, in our word number 9, hamed. Right? But it's a forbidden. What she's got going on here is she and her man, who's right there with her, he's just as guilty as she is. They're desirous of something which is forbidden. Now, the other word that I translated crave, by the way, which makes up word number 10, is avah. And that is the other word used in this story in Genesis 3:6, where it says a delight to the eyes. That's avah. It's a craving to the eyes. It's appealing. It's a drawing for her eyes. But we're going to get to that in just a few moments. Okay, listen to this. The tree was not good for food. It was forbidden to eat. The desire for the forbidden led to an infraction. And there's a reason for this story. Whether people think that this is a literal story or it's a myth or whatever people think about it, the bottom line, the principle of the story is, listen to this, if you do like they did, you too will find yourself in deeper sin. If you don't control your inner impulses, you too will be led off into other sins. The woman of our neighbor is forbidden. Everybody knows you're not to adulterate her, but you're not even to desire her. If you desire her, you've already committed adultery with her, comma, in your heart. I know some people don't agree with that. But if you read the text, if you study Scripture, you recognize that it is not enough for someone to say, man, I sure want to kill that person, but I hadn't yet. Okay, now for the second, for word 10. This is a lot easier. I'm going to roll through this and I'm going to tie it all together. I can put a bow on this thing very nicely now. It's much easier. The word Aleph, Vav, He is very similar in meaning to Hamed. They are similar. These two words are close enough that the writer, the author of Exodus's version of the 10 words, pulls it all together and uses one word to describe everything, whereas Deuteronomy distinguishes between Hamed and Avah and separates these into two distinct words. In Genesis 3:6, where it says, a delight to the eyes, the root is Avah, Aleph, Vav, He. It means to desire, to delight, to crave. Even lust is a word that I can see in that particular Hebrew. Go with me. Let me give you a couple of examples of, now we're talking about you shall not crave. Remember in our word number 10, you shall not crave your neighbor's house, his field, his servant, his handmaid, his ox, his donkey, and all that is your neighbor. Now go with me to Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11. In Numbers 11, beginning in verse 4, and the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting. I like that. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we had in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. Let me tell you something about this story. It's not that meat is forbidden. In fact, in Deuteronomy Chapter 12, verse 20, it talks about if you craving of meat is not illegal in the biblical sense. Deuteronomy 12:20 says, if you crave to eat meat, here's the manner in which you're to do it. And it describes a very specific way that it's done. But notice that they did crave, but what they craved was what they didn't have. I'll say it again. What they craved was what they didn't have. God had given them something for the nourishment, and they are not satisfied with what God provided as their lot in life. Now think about that. What they did was they yearned, another word for crave, they yearned to return. They longed for something other than what Jehovah had provided for them. It's not a sin to crave. It is a sin to crave something that God didn't give you. Now, verse 20, if you look down at verse 20 of Numbers 11, please do. Numbers 11, verse 20. God gives them ultimately, you want meat that you had? I'm going to give you so many quail, it's going to come out your nose, you know that. But a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils, and it'll be loathsome to you because, get this, you have despised Jehovah who is among you and have wept before him, saying, why did we come out of Egypt, and so forth and so on. That ultimately, they're craving for something that God didn't give to them. Ultimately, that was considered a rejection of Jehovah. Now go with me to Psalm 106. Psalm 106, please. Psalm 106 and verse 14. Let's start with 13. They soon forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness and tried God in the desert. They lusted exceedingly. That's our word for crave. So what they did, the crime was that they desired, first of all, they rejected Jehovah and his bounty and what he had given them. That's what they did. They craved something that God had not given them. The 10-word covenant provides boundaries for human behavior. Our behavior in regards to the deity, and our behavior or boundaries in regard to our behavior with other humans. These boundaries govern our behavior in action, in word, and yes, even the formation of our thoughts. Our desires and our cravings for what belongs to others and for what God has not given or provided us can lead to wrong action and to wrong words. When it comes to transgressing Jehovah's ways, ladies and gentlemen, don't even think about it. Shabbat Shalom.